Today, we are speaking with Scott Mason. Scott is a lawyer, having spent a couple of decades in general counsel related roles, who turned entrepreneur as a motivational keynote speaker and business owner. As a keynote motivational speaker and podcast host, Scott focuses on resilience, personal transformation, social ethics, leadership, and the entrepreneurial mindset. He also provides leadership mentoring and consulting services regarding operations, strategy, business development, and scaling to small businesses. I'm really excited to learn more. I know there's some good, interesting stories here, Scott. Thank you for joining us on Fresh Blood. Please, could you tell us a little bit more about your personal story and getting to where you are today? Here's the big question. How do you create your most authentic, successful, and fulfilling life? The Fresh Blood podcast studies the stories of people over the age of 40 who are thriving in life, finding those core golden threads that connect the underlying successes, those universal truths. I'll be your host, Jolie Downs. Listen and learn from the stories of others to help you soar and live the life that you were meant to thrive in.
Absolutely. You know, how we frame our stories is to me everything. And so when I tell about who I am and a little bit about my background, I try and make it in a way that actually is not just about me, but provides meaning to the audience. And so some of these things may not seem at first like they're actually relevant, but I promise that they are, especially when we talk a little bit more about why. I was born in England to a British woman that was studying linguistics in graduate school. And she had an affair. I did not know this until I was an adult, but she had an affair with a man who was in law school there from Trinidad.
Oh,
And
interesting.
yeah,
Okay, go
out,
on.
out popped me.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And at that time, having a biracial child when both parents were in graduate school kind of was problematic. And so I was put up for adoption. I was adopted by two African Americans who flew me over the ocean. I actually had an earlier name. It was Calvin Franz Crowdy, but it was changed to my current name
Isn't that
when I
fascinating?
crossed the ocean. And I was raised in the Midwest. My dad worked for the State Highway Patrol. My mother worked in a dog food factory. And it was a very, very different existence than what I imagined that it might have been growing up in England. But it was one of the framing experiences of my life. I think about so many people that went on to accomplish amazing things, particularly in mythology or folk history. And a lot of times you have this story of someone who was adopted by being cast out by their parents and crossing the ocean. And over time, I came to view that experience of crossing the ocean, losing the Calvin Franz Crowdy identity and becoming Scott Mason, as almost a spiritual or an internal metaphorical rebirth. And although that experience of growing up in Kansas, a biracial child of African Americans who happened to be LGBTQ in social milieu that was, to say the least,
Just
kind of
mixing them
hostile.
in there.
Yeah, they weren't going for it. But
What was that
having
like for you?
shifted, it was hard. It was hard. First of all, even as a biracial child, there were instances of overt discrimination that I faced in school. I had, for instance, a debate teacher say about me in front of my entire class, "You can teach a monkey how to speak, but you can't teach him how to think." And
This
then
is
when
from the
you
teacher.
from the teacher,
Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
absolutely.
What do you even do with that as a child? I mean, did you develop any coping mechanisms or any way to deal with this growing up that was successful for you? Because I would imagine that most people probably develop things that are not successful for them because you're a
Yeah,
child dealing with things you shouldn't be dealing with.
yeah, yeah. Thank you for asking that. I was really into music
Mm.
when I was an early teenager. It was the height of the disco era. And
Oh,
what a perfect escape for a kid like me who felt, particularly because of the LGBTQ plus issue, I didn't really feel at home in my own family, let alone the larger social situation that I was in.
Yeah,
But
I'm sorry.
I could shut the door in my bedroom, put on some headphones like those I'm wearing right now,
Mhm.
and dance away to music. And it was free. And my favorite song, well, I had a lot of favorite songs, but one of them was Funky Town.
Yeah, I love
You know that
yeah,
song?
I know Funky
And you can imagine what I
Town.
was thinking in the plains of Kansas. I got to
Yeah.
move to that town that's
Yes,
right
you
for me.
do. Oh, yeah.
And that became the destination of the journey that I knew I ultimately had to make.
Mm,
And that's how I
mhm,
ended up here in New York, the ultimate funky town.
mm. Now, how did you end up in New York? How'd you make it from, growing up in this space, which does not sound like it was very easy. Um, how did you make it there to New York? What happened?
I went to college in the Midwest as well, but I knew I wanted, or thought I knew, I wanted to be an attorney. And so I applied to law schools that would provide the maximum educational pedigree as well as quality of education, but that were in cities. I knew I could not live and be happy in a rural environment anymore. And you don't get more unrural than New York City. So I applied to Columbia Law School. I was accepted. The minute my little feet hit the sidewalks outside of Grand Central, Julie, I was home.
You knew you could feel it, right? There's something in your bones, right? It's just like you can breathe freely.
It's like glitter balls just descended from the sky. And I was dancing in the streets.
Oh, I love it. Oh gosh, I can just feel that feeling right now, you know?
You can relate, huh?
Yes, yes, that's so great. So tell me about your time in New York, like acclimating, because that's a big change too. I mean, even though you felt like you were home, that's still a big change. What was that like for you?
Liberating.
Yeah.
That's the main thing that I felt. Now, I will say, when you're the child of a dog food factory worker, and suddenly you're at Columbia Law School, I was walking around with people whose parents were law professors. There was a woman in my class whose grandparent was on the US Supreme Court. You had former major league seasoned executives in the class looking to transition their careers, people who had really done a lot with their lives, and then me.
Yeah.
And
Now, did you
I
get scholarships? Did you pay this for yourself? I
Oh,
mean,
I pulled out loans until I
loans.
was 41
Yes.
to
Mhm,
pay
okay, I
off.
understand that. Been there.
But
Yeah.
Columbia didn't offer scholarships because they
Yeah.
assumed you'd be so rich when you were done that
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Well, we'll talk about that on another podcast.
Yeah.
But answering your question, I'll never forget sitting down one day at a park in the middle of downtown New York City, a place I'd never really, this particular park I'd never seen before. I was still exploring and looking at all these tall buildings and seeing these masses of people walk by and thinking about all of these people I was meeting at these meet and greets that Columbia was having for its students and understanding the true depth of my insignificance. I was overwhelmed. I felt smaller than a speck of sand in the world's largest beach. I'm glad that happened. Humility is something that has been a huge asset going forward in my life. And heaven knows that can create a learning mindset that put me in a position to grow into something different than I might have been if I had just kept my ego right up front and center and not let that be vulnerable.
Thank you for that. That's so
Yeah,
important.
thank
It's
you
so
for asking.
important. And you're so right. That does put you exactly in that mindset for growth.
Yeah,
The understanding of it's that bigger overall understanding of really we are specks in
yeah,
this greater universe. It's just
absolutely. It's mind blowing, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. But at the same time, the whole universe is within our side ourselves. It's
Yeah,
just it's really amazing.
yeah,
So yes, I love that. But coming from life from that perspective opens you up to wondrous things. So
it's the
thank you for
best.
sharing that. Now, so you go into law school, and I noticed that you held many general counsel roles with prominent companies and organizations.
Yes.
You obviously were doing well for yourself. Tell me a little bit about that time, and what do you think helped you be successful during those years?
Yeah. First of all, the one thing that I'm most proud of that I did during that time, and this is an example of, depending on how you view it, either a very, very fortunate coincidence or the power of providence. I worked as an assistant general counsel for the New York City Department of Buildings, and my area was really construction safety laws, rules, and regulations. And I was doing that job of all jobs on 9/11. And I had the privilege of working at the Emergency Command Center for months afterwards. And then the project that consumed the overwhelming bulk of my career for the next probably 2.5 years, maybe even 3, was skyscraper safety legislation. So that if such an incident were to ever occur in the city again, the catastrophic physical failures that led to thousands of people dying would hopefully not occur. And so, if there is anything that I could say about my years in government and working in council positions that I would sort of pinpoint as my moment of greatest pride and say, okay, if I were to just drop off the face of the earth tomorrow, I would have done something, that was it. And I felt so lucky, Julie, because so many people, not just in New York, but around the world, wanted to be able to help. I was able to.
You were able
Not
to.
only was I able to, I was able to in a way that was pivotal and meaningful. That isn't to say there weren't hardships along the way or frustrations.
Oh, I can
Remember,
only imagine.
yeah, going back, there was one day when my building was within the red zone,
Mhm.
and there was a false summer. I think it was in October of that year, maybe early November. The temperature was higher than usual. I was working in the building that my office was in late, and all of the windows were sealed and the doors were sealed just because that's how things were. And I left and took the elevator down and stepped out onto the street. And on TV, can't capture the full range of physical senses that are assaulted by something like that, including smell. And in the heat, the smell of rotting human flesh overwhelmed the whole area. I will never forget as long as I live saying, holding my breath and saying, God, please let me be able to hold my breath until I get to the subway. And I walked as fast as I could, and there was another woman walking the opposite direction on the sidewalk. And the streets were by and large, understandably, empty. And she had a turtleneck on that she covered her nose with, and then covered that in turn with her hand. And as we passed each other, we looked at each other in the eye. We just looked at each other. I think we were anchoring each other in a momentary sense of bonding, but in disbelief,
Mhm.
but also calm. So she could maybe make it where she was going, and I could too.
Yeah. That needed connection there. Oh, I can't even imagine.
It
It's
was
just
horrible.
horrifying. It's horrifying. I'm curious from that time. I mean, my senses are feeling a little overwhelmed just thinking about what that must have been like. It's hard for me to imagine what that was like, being there. What Going through all of that experience, what would you say is your greatest takeaway as far as the thing that has helped carry you through that, in a positive way? Is there anything that you really learned that
Yeah.
has helped you?
Something about you, I feel like I can just tell you anything. So I'm going to tell you something that I've not revealed on a podcast before. After that, maybe because I was working on 9/11 related work for so long, I had this obsession. I knew that there were people that had gone to work that day, just like I had, and had thought that it would be just like any other day, had taken those elevators up to the top floors. And the next thing they knew, they were jumping out for their lives, landing on the ground, hundreds and hundreds of feet below. Or I saw pictures of people that were hanging from the windows up there, trying to hold on, maybe hoping that something would happen that could be pulled back up or someone would somehow save them. And it began with thinking, what if that had been my husband? Like the pain of imagining him jumping hundreds and hundreds of feet off the top of the World Trade Center, hanging from a window. I couldn't bear it. So the first thing that led me to begin to do was really be conscious about making sure I tell him I love him all the time. And I do that to this day because the thought of something like that happening to him, and I know he'd be in my mind at the very last moments. I know I'd be in his mind. The thought of pain, hurtful words being something that he would think about
Right.
with me is something I couldn't bear.
Right.
But more importantly, perspective. It sounds obvious, but it's really meaningful for me. What matters? What doesn't? Right? Like, is it really worth? And I will be the first to admit I failed sometimes with this, but I strive to remember, is that thing that we're that upset about really that important? Like, if you end up hanging from the 87th floor of a building because a fire is there and your death is imminent, or if you have to jump when you're flying down to the ground, you thinking about that memo, you're thinking about your life. I My very first venture into entrepreneurialism was with an apparel printing company that I co-owned, and I'll never forget. Someone called me up and yelled and screamed at me, and they were crying and all this sort of stuff because in this batch of T-shirts that we printed, they were for a band, and on the back of the T-shirt there were red, orange dots that listed next to them the dates of the concerts that band had in North America. And on 3 of the smalls out of an order of maybe 350 shirts, a couple of the dots were orange red as opposed to red orange. And so that's why I got this hysterical call about crying and yelling and all this sort of stuff. And it was one of those things where inside I was thinking, you all don't know and they were saying this is an emergency. We can't live like this anymore. I was thinking inside, you don't know what an emergency is.
Yeah.
You really don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also getting me to understand I don't want to be that person.
Mhm.
What matters?
Yes.
Does a dot on a T-shirt matter,
No.
or like this other stuff?
Yes. No, that's so important. That perspective is vital. That's what gives you fulfillment in life, is understanding these
Yeah,
things. I mean, you need to understand these things in order to really grasp what is great and appreciate it and have that gratitude for it. And you're absolutely right. And I do the same exact thing, Scott. The people I love, it is always, and I love you, regardless of what's happening or said. It's, we leave with, and I love you. Those will
yeah,
always be my last words.
yeah,
And I'm so grateful for it, because you know what? Bad things have happened. And I can feel okay inside that the
yeah,
last words were, I love you.
yeah.
So I
Exactly,
think that's something
exactly.
everyone should do.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what brought you out of being a lawyer? And you said earlier, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. So did
Mhm.
you come to this realization that this wasn't the right thing for you? Is that why you made a change, or was it some other reason?
It was a couple of reasons. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer because the set of myths that I had told myself about who I was and what my life could be was very limited. It wasn't imaginative enough, if I were to be candid with you.
I think it's very
And
limited for so many of us out there.
isn't it sad?
It really is.
Yeah.
And
So there was a combination of fortune, if you'll call it that, causing me to reconsider my life, as well as a shift in my own mindset that occurred. I worked for the government for nearly 20 years. And the last job I had was as second in command of the New York City's administrative tribunal system. It was an agency that employed hundreds of people. It brought in approximately $100 million of tax revenue every year. It was a great, fantastic job that I was utterly miserable in. I was completely disconnected from. I had this huge office. It's palatial, actually. It's bigger than my apartment. And I had my own closet in there
oh
and
my
a
goodness.
coffee table and right this incredible view of the Hudson River, especially when the sun would go down. I was miserable. And that being said, it had still never occurred to me that my life could change. One day, though, the agency head called me in for a meeting, and we were discussing this, that, and the other. And she abruptly said, Scott, sometimes I feel like you try and keep me at arm's length within my own agency. I don't like that. Now, I actually didn't want her position. I liked what I was doing,
Mhm.
and I had never desired to usurp her or do anything actually but support her or the taxpayers of the city of New York. But I've been around long enough to know, and I'm sure you know as well, when words like that are uttered, it's over. And in fact, within 60 days, we had had an agreement in which I would be leaving. And that was what I needed. It was during the middle of the Great Recession, or maybe in the tail end of it. I know that for men my age with executive backgrounds, the newspapers and magazines were full of what was called unemployment porn, which was
Oh, I
stories about,
remember.
you
Oh,
remember,
I remember, yes.
yeah. After a year, I went to a career coach. He told me, "Oh, Scott, with your resume and all this, your experience, you'll have a job within 3 months." Well, that didn't happen.
That was like that for many, but it's a very hard thing to go through. It's emotionally taxing, and I know I talked to many people during this time. How did you deal with it? What was that like for you?
You know, after a year had passed, resume after resume had gone out, I began to think about my prospects for the future or lack thereof. And one night, about 3:30 in the morning, I woke up, really began to take stock of where things were going. And I was utterly overwhelmed. And so I will not lie. I started to cry. That cry was uncontrollable. I just cried and I
It's
cried
needed.
and I cried. I woke up my husband. He literally wiped my tears. He listened. He comforted me. And then after about an hour and a half of all this, we both, out of exhaustion, fell back asleep. Now, the next morning, he happened to not need to go to work. And I, of course, didn't have a job to go to. And so he said, "Why don't we go for a bicycle ride?" And I said, "Okay, why not?" So I live in an apartment building. We got our bicycles, we put them on our shoulders, we walked down the stairs, and we hit the sidewalk, we crossed the sidewalk, and we got to the street in front of my building. And we took the bicycles off of our shoulders. And what happened next, I'll never forget. The tires hit the street. And my husband said, "Scott, take a look around." And Julie, I did. The sky was crystal blue. Leaves, they were painfully green. And the yellow of my bike, listen, like gold in the sun. Take a look around, is what he said to me. Because this moment will pass. You will work again. And you look back on this moment and it'll be gone. You can never have it back. That not only helped me make it through the day, but it began to put me in a position where I could see the beauty even in the smallest of things. And seeing that beauty, answering your original question, was how I began to make it through.
It's the beginning, right?
Yeah,
It's the start, seeing the beauty.
yeah,
You see it, you open it up, allow it in your life, and then there's more. You bring in more. You bring in a little more. You bring in a little more.
exactly.
It's how
It's
the
like a
healing
practice.
begins. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. It is really hard. It is a soul sucking process that people can go
yeah,
through, but that is a wonderful way to do it, and that's the advice that I try to give people. Is I know this is very hard, and the emotions that go through. There's so much fear and anxiety, but if you can take a look around, just like what he said, if you can enjoy this moment in life in any way that you possibly can. This will pass, this will be gone. And we spend the majority of our lives working, working, working. And I do believe that sometimes the universe interjects to make you
yeah,
think, to make you stop, to make you learn. And I believe that there is these shifts. I mean, just like you said, you were in this lawyer job, completely unhappy, and you didn't even consider the fact that you could be happy. And the universe, I believe that that friction with you and your boss, that's the universe stepping in and saying, all right, let's shake this up a little bit. You need to reevaluate. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what happened when you found something? Where did you go from there?
I ended up working in the nonprofit sector, but in order to make ends meet, I did some consulting work for a martial arts school owner that a friend of mine introduced me to.
Great idea. I always tell people that too. Consulting is a great way to continue your work, even if you're doing it for free. You just continue your work, you continue your building your skill set, and you never know where that will lead.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it ended up changing my life.
Ooh, tell me
It's
more.
weird because we all walk around entrepreneurs, small business owners every day. But I was so caught up in this, again, limited mythology set in my mind about who I was and what I could be that I wasn't seeing it. I would go into, in fact, there was an entrepreneur that I'll never forget seeing one day. Was when I worked at a different government job than I've talked to you about before. I had a 7 o'clock meeting in the morning, and then after that, I went to get some breakfast. And there I was in my suit. Again, great pay, great title, lots of staff members. I stepped outside and I was crossing the street to get to the diner. And I turned to my right and I saw one of those metal coffee stands that are often on the corners outside of offices in big buildings. And there was a man inside there, an entrepreneur who owned that little coffee stand. And he was giving people coffee for 75 cents. And he had the biggest smile on his face when I walked by and I saw him giving someone that cup of coffee. And I remember being so angry. I was angry and I was jealous. I was full of rage because who was he to smile at his job? How dare he experience happiness? What was that even all about? I couldn't even comprehend it. So I was walking around people that were not within my light cone, but experiencing happiness all the time. I just couldn't process them. And working for this martial arts guy got me to begin to understand that there are people who are living their dreams, who are feeling professional freedom,
Mm-hmm.
which was something I'd never experienced. So although I went into the nonprofit sector, even then I really viewed it as a transitional job until I could build up enough capital to be able to think straight and be able to transition into entrepreneurship full time. And that's how
Mm-hmm.
I ultimately ended up working at that apparel printing company that I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's so, yeah. I think that's a fantastic takeaway because it basically it sounds like working there opened up your mind to what success is, and that there are many definitions for it. So,
Yes.
which leads me to what would you say your definition of success is, and based on that, what do you think is key to having continued success throughout life?
I mentioned earlier the stories about in mythology
Hmm.
about how heroes might be cast out by their parents, they cross water, they're adopted by someone else, and they go on a journey that leads into
Hmm.
something that's beyond what they could imagine. The end of every one of those stories has the hero coming home. Coming home is to me a metaphorical concept. And to me, that metaphor is what success is. Coming home is when you step into the full range of talents and skills, combine them with the experiences that you've had, and then wrap purpose around it or wrap service around it. When you do that and you're fully manifesting every single possibility that the gifts and talents that you were given by Providence out into the world, you've come home.
Yes.
You found
Yes.
success.
Yes. And that's based on what's inside of you, not
Yes.
what society says, right? Not what anyone else says, just based on what's inside of you. Yes.
No.
That's that coming home,
Yeah.
that rightness. Like,
Society would never have said, Scott, wear leather suspenders, be on a podcast, go around talking about stuff left and right and working for yourself. Why would you give up being a lawyer? I've heard that so many times. Why wouldn't I? After a while, looking back on everything that happened, how I felt inside during those years, why did I wait so long? It's
yes.
because I was out of touch. Exactly the opposite of what you're talking about us needing to do. I was
Mhm.
utterly alienated from my own fundamental humanity.
Yes. Yeah.
Once that connection happens, like you just said, we're home.
We're
We're
home.
successful.
Hmm. Yes, yes. And that is, finding that road is not easy.
Yeah.
And the universe, I do believe, comes and, knocks us up, but we don't always listen. So we
Yeah.
just keep, often we keep like, with your mix up, you said that working for that nonprofit helped you see things in a different way. Whereas, you could have, what if you'd gotten another general counsel job in another similar type of organization and just kept going down that same track being miserable?
Yeah.
I mean, there's well, now tell me, out of all the things that you've done, because we've talked about, and we haven't even really gone into your but motivational speaking, okay, is like the next step. Um, I want to hear more about that, but I'm curious, out of everything that you've done, what do you feel has been your greatest success? Why? And what did you learn from it? And you can give me a couple if you can't choose, because I hate, it's really hard to choose that number one thing in life.
I actually would say being able to transition into entrepreneurship.
Mm,
I would say the process of leaving the safety and security of a large organization, which included that nonprofit that I worked for,
mhm,
and building a life of my own. The company that I co owned, after I'd been there about 2 years, I went to a holiday party that was sponsored by a bunch of attorneys that I worked for during one of my very early attorney jobs.
mhm,
And I went to the apartment building where that party was, and I took the elevator up and I approached the apartment door, inside of which was the party, and I could hear everyone laughing, and I recognized some of the laughs, and I was imagining in my head who and what these people were like these days. I know all of them had stayed attorneys in more or less the same positions or types of positions their whole life. And I suddenly felt total fear inside. I thought, oh, they're going to laugh at me, or they're going to think you failed as an attorney, or why are you doing this, or just look at me in dumbstruck like disbelief
yeah, it's the
or
fear of being
contempt.
judged. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just,
Yeah,
we all feel these ways. Yes.
yeah. But I sucked it up.
Good job.
I went in, I didn't run home like I wanted to and hide under the bed.
Yeah.
And there was an old friend of mine there. I hadn't seen her in probably 10 years. And she was so welcoming. She had the same, actually, sort of smile and warmth that you do. So that's
Thank
part of
you.
why I'm enjoying this so
Thank
much, because
you.
you remind me of this very special human being. And I told her what I was doing. I said, but I'm afraid to be here because I know everyone's going to laugh at me. And she said, are you kidding? They're all going to be jealous. You're going to be
Yep,
the belle of the ball. And I was.
you were. Yeah, that's what I was thinking when you were telling me how worried you were going to be. And that's the truth of so much in life, right? I mean, it's that imposter syndrome that gets us. It's that
Yeah.
that judgy, that fear of being judged, and we all do that to ourselves. And a lot of times we don't walk through the door. So
Yeah.
that's why I said good job for
Yeah.
walking through the door.
Thank you.
Fake it till you make it. But honestly, yes, when you're embodying what you should be doing, people see that, they feel it, and they feel jealous when they're not doing it themselves.
Well, and you are rewriting your story, and so at a fundamental level, even the buildings department job that I mentioned earlier, I'm really proud of that.
Mhm.
But internal transformation is the most difficult thing of all. The transformation that the buildings department skyscraper safety work represented, of course, will save lives. But it wasn't a fundamental structural reformation of anything. It wasn't like we completely re envisioned how buildings are built.
Mhm.
This was completely re envisioning how the building that I am was built. And that's a whole different ballgame.
Oh, and it's so beautiful. That gives me chills. I just
Uh,
love it. I just love
Glad
it.
to hear that.
Now, well, what about the flip side of my question? A time that you perceived failure, or you dealt with a huge obstacle, huge challenge, just really difficult time in life, and what did you learn from it?
Again, I'm going to keep it real with you. And this was painful. I worked for a government agency that had oversight over, in my division, over about 350 or so nonprofit programs.
Mhm.
And there was a new agency head who was brought in and had an initiative that she wanted to roll out. And all of the senior executives felt that this was a bad idea for a number of reasons. Some of them
Mhm.
were administrative, some of them were fiscal, some of them were political, and some of them were policy. And all of the executives got together. We sort of hashed out our feelings about this, and I was appointed the person who should tell her this.
Ooh.
So we gathered those executives as well
Mhm.
as my own staff, all of whom could answer questions, and it was a show of soft force to let her know that we really were looking out for her own interest.
Mhm.
And I explained what our concern was about this and why we really felt this would be problematic, particularly as a precedent, that it was one of those stones that once you started to roll it down the hill, there was no stopping it. And she looked at me in front of my staff and all of my colleagues, and she said, and this really was a low point in my career. She said, Scott, when you open your mouth, I've got to say, you always sound so stupid. You should just buy a gun and put it in your mouth and shoot.
Oh my goodness, you've got to be kidding me. What a horrible, horrible thing to say to anybody. I'm stunned. I am stunned. I think I'd be speechless in that moment to that person, just because, like, seriously, that's who you are? That's the person you are, that you would say something that way?
Yeah.
I mean, it says way more about her than anything, if you ask me,
But you experience it as a
in a
person
different
who's
way.
nervous, right, and who is not necessarily as mature as I am now, looking back on it. All these
Oh,
sorts of
well, when you're in that moment too, yes, it's very, very different. Please go
yeah.
ahead. Yes.
No, that's okay. It was one of those things that was, I think, the lowest point. And at that point, though, it was a catalyst for change because I had had a number of different bosses that the use of soft power wasn't something that I had experienced a lot of.
Hmm.
And so this was an extreme example of it. And it also fed into insecurities. I'm the boy from Kansas whose mom worked in a dog food factory.
Hmm.
Did I really belong at the head of a division, this sort of oversight?
Hmm.
Maybe I really was as stupid as everyone had thought I was all along.
Hmm.
And maybe the expectations that I'd had for myself weren't aligned with what my real capabilities were.
See, all
So
very
I
human
really had to
reactions.
go through a lot of turmoil inside to deal
Hmm.
with this. But as I'm sure you hear lots of times in the work that you do, you absorb these sorts of things, you process them. If you're smart, you transmogrify them into chapter breaks in your life and use
Yes,
them as a chance to
I like that.
start telling some new stories.
Yes, yes, I like that. But that is a very human reaction. We have all of our insecurities, and when someone says something that really says way more about them than it says about us, our own insecurities latch onto that
Yeah,
and run away. They run away with it.
yeah,
And this is one of the key things that I've learned. And really, I learned this much later in life. And doing this podcast has really solidified it very much so, that what other people have to say and do it really has no bearing on you. It has everything to do with their own stories, their own issues.
yeah.
But I mean, I've internalized it my entire life, and I've just, over the past years, have been able to learn how to start
Wow.
to let go of that and just be like, well, that's about you. That really isn't about me. That's not because this terrible person, right? It's you got some things you need to work through. I'm just going to sit here in myself and feel really good and move along.
Congratulations, by the way, on getting there, because a lot of people live their whole lives and they're never able to do that.
Oh, wow. It's a process. It is a process, but it is one of the things that I've learned that have been the greatest benefits in my life. It's a freeing thing because, um, as someone, I grew up a Catholic girl. Everything I was guilty. Everything it was always my fault. Everything was my fault, and I would carry that guilt around with me.
Aw.
So it's really important to learn to let go and not take other people's baggage.
Yeah.
It's very easy to carry other people's baggage. So anyway, so I'm curious, because what would be one thing that you've learned in your life that has really brought you the most advantage?
I would say that the willingness and ability to take risks, to be fearless, or to learn to be fearless about the next step has been a massive advantage. By the way, particularly if we choose to lean into the creativity that many, if not all of us, have inside.
Oh,
And we may
yes.
have buried or suppressed our creativity, or we may forget that we have it. And I certainly buried and suppressed my own creativity and thought I was purely some sort of uncreative drone for a long time. But as I uncovered that creativity, as I uncovered the willingness and the ability to take risk, there's down days, but I would much rather live the life of Odysseus on some huge epic adventure with the ups and downs than die having said I spent my whole life safely behind a pile of paper. I had a boss once who told me that her dream of the afterlife, and she was serious when she said this, was to have a desk. And on that desk was a pile, would be a pile of paper that would go up as high as you could see in the heavens. And she would basically be sitting there doing paperwork forever. Now, that may have been her idea. That may have been her idea of heaven.
I
It
hope she was in the
wasn't
right
mine.
job. I hope she was in the right. Hopefully she was in the right job, doing a lot of paperwork, making herself happy every day.
Totally.
See, we all have our personal dreams. It's just about getting in touch with them.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
certainly was creative. I would have never imagined heaven that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you said that you didn't think you were creative, and I used to think I wasn't creative too.
Really?
And the thing is I think what it is that boxed, like you were saying, you get this boxed sense of a definition, if you will, and it was like, well, I can't paint, so I'm not creative. But there's creativity everywhere, and everybody's creative in their own special
So
ways.
true.
Yes. So now we haven't even really gotten into, well, okay, before we go there, you just said that for you, the courage, the bravery is what has made the biggest impact in your life. How has that helped you? What has that led to for you?
It's led to me having the sort of adventures that have taken me out of unhappiness and into careers that are progressively better and better and better. Julie, I wake up every morning, laying in my bed. I swing my hips to the side. My feet hit the floor. I put my palms down on that mattress and I jump up and I'm ready to go. I feel when I'm living my life that I'm going down a river and there's this sort of electric blue thing going through me. And that's
Yes.
driving me. I feel like I'm on the Providential River. Now, as we mentioned earlier, that Providential River has some rocks in it sometimes. And sometimes
Yes.
there are some waterfalls and all that sort
Mhm.
of stuff. But so what?
Yeah.
I get up and that Providential River and that electric blue bolt is there. I'm able to bring energy into the room and life into the room every day. Speaking of disco, there was a Donna Summer song in the 70s where she sang about working the midnight shift and looking, cleaning, dusting or mopping a floor while everyone was outside dressed up to go to a party. Well, I'm the guy dressed up and going to the party. And that to me is the benefit. That's what it's brought me.
I love it.
Electricity? All the money in the world couldn't buy that.
No. Scott, to me, what you just said is my personal definition of success right
I love
there.
it. I love it,
That's the
really.
goal for everyone. To me, that should be everyone's goal, is to have that feeling every morning when you wake up, that you feel that you're living your life in that, what'd you say? The
The
purple
Providential
river?
River.
Yes. I love it. I'm gonna keep that.
We're going to get a boat and sail down it together.
Yes. That's fantastic. Now, wait, so we didn't get into your motivational speaking. How did you get into the motivational speaking?
So, one of the things that I realized that I needed to do in order to fully actualize myself as a presence in this world was focus on the gifts that I had. I did almost like an archaeological excavation into my entire life.
Mm.
What were all of the things that people said about me and that I really enjoyed? I went and talked to a whole bunch of friends of mine, asked them to put down 5 words that described me. Interestingly, the one word that came up every last time, every single person said it, was charisma. Now, if I were saying that about myself, I might come off as just a little bit conceited. But if everyone says it, well, who am I to disagree?
You have wonderful charisma, Scott. I can.
Well, and
I
I'm,
can
and
attest.
I'm always, whenever there's someone, to think about the put a pistol in your mouth story I just told you. I was appointed to be the one to go and talk to her.
Yeah.
So really, all of the experiences that I had taught me lessons that I could share. But the
Hmm.
ability to be out there and sharing it in a way that people would want to listen to, that would be entertaining or bring energy into the room, the fire that I feel inside of me all the time was something that I want to have go out and for other people
Yeah.
to feel connected to. And
Hmm.
so ultimately, that seemed like a logical, not only a logical choice, but an emotionally satisfying choice, and a way that I could meet the definition of success that we talked about earlier, which is
Hmm.
fully being ourselves in the world.
Yeah. Love it. That's so great. Now, you've been different points in your life, and I appreciate you sharing them with me. And I'm curious if you have any advice for people who might be at those points in their lives right now. Maybe they're stuck. Maybe they're looking for something new. Maybe they're unhappy in their career. Is there any advice that you would give someone who is currently struggling in that moment that you think might help them?
Yes. Three little tidbits may help folks. First of all, tying back into this theme of myths. If you're feeling stuck or stagnated, what are the stories about yourself and what's possible for your life that you are telling yourself
Yes.
or that you bought into? Understand that these stories aren't necessarily true. And so, really do an assessment of the mythology of your life in light of what is actual and in light of what you want it to be. The falsehoods can be tossed aside once you know that they're lies.
Mhm.
Number
Mhm.
two, examine every relationship in your life. Who are those that are capable of hopping on your ship and going on an epic journey with you? Focus on them. Finally, rituals. You can build a new life, or at least support building a better non-stagnant life for yourself by engaging in little rituals, and they can and should start small, that cement your relationship with your future, or that are tied to the better life that you imagine for yourself. Over time, these little rituals become habits. These
Mhm.
habits can have a big impact. Do those things and you'll be well on your way to starting some new chapters.
Mm, really good advice all around. Really good advice. I'm curious, what rituals did you start for yourself that helped you the most?
Discomfort.
Ooh, good one. Ooh,
That,
such a good one.
that martial arts owner, one of the compensations that I got was free jujitsu instruction.
Ooh, cool.
Yeah, best compensation ever. And I would wear these heavy robes into a dojo that didn't have air conditioning in the summer. And I would face my martial arts skills, by the way, were horrible.
Is this
I
in
was
New
a,
York?
in New York.
Ooh,
Yeah,
hot.
yeah. And then sometimes it'd be snowy, the weather would be bad, and I wouldn't want to go. But my ritual was going there, bowing to my partners as they would bow to me to practice humility, and taking in the criticism. Yes, I
Mm,
was horrible. Whose fault was it? It was mine. My technique was bad. I couldn't blame the instructor. I couldn't blame my partners. Couldn't blame anyone but Scott. And those little rituals are two things. First of all, again, I was uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable basically being beat up every day
mm.
after day. Wearing these robes in this hot weather without air conditioning got me used to. And to this day, although I don't really practice martial arts anymore, I'm not particularly sensitive to temperature changes anymore.
That's
I'm
pretty
fine. Yeah.
amazing.
And then taking accountability. So those little
Taking
rituals
accountability.
ultimately set me up to be able to make greater and greater transitions, and they've held me well to the rest of my life.
Oh, yeah. Those are big ones too. I love what you just said. And accountability also
Oh
huge.
yeah.
If you don't take accountability for yourself, you can't make any change. It's like you just blame it all. You see the people who blame everything on other people, and you're just like, wow, you're never going to move from the spot until you can look inside. You will never move from the spot. It's
So and it
it's
gets old too. No one
yeah,
wants to hear it after a while. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah, and we all get there in life. I mean, I
Yeah.
remember that was one thing that shook me up was that floating above yourself and just hearing that complaining,
Mm,
and just like, who are you? Oof, let's change that up right
yeah,
now.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, well, now being a motivational speaker, I would imagine that you've seen some pretty amazing speeches and whatnot. I'm curious if you've seen any amazing speeches that other people should listen to, or if you've read a book or seen a video that had a big impact on your life that you'd think other people could benefit from.
Some of the greatest speeches I've ever seen have actually been through Toastmasters. And in a way, I have some difficulty answering that question. When I've gone to the international conventions they have, which are basically massive speech fests, you see people from around the world giving mind blowing speech after mind blowing speech after mind blowing speech after mind blowing speech. And so, my answer to that and my recommendation for anyone who wants to develop as a leader or a public presence in the world, or who just wants to meet amazing people, go to Toastmasters and just start watching and listening to everything that is around you. You'll have to get practice taking your jaw up off the floor. That's a
I
good thing.
completely I 100% agree, and do I give the same recommendation to everybody. I'm a Toastmaster as well.
I love it.
and,
I
and
love it.
and it was my first meeting. I remember my first meeting, this woman stood up and they said what the title was of the speech, and I was like, oh gosh, this is gonna be boring. And she gave the most fascinating speech. I
Oh, I
was
know.
so enthralled. And exactly, my jaw dropped. And I, at the end of that meeting, is like, I want to be like her. I want to learn how to do that. Because she took this topic that I thought I was ready to check out, and
Wow.
she made me fascinated. And that is just a talent that I've continuously been in awe of. So, yes, Toastmasters is a great place.
We're best friends now.
So Scott, if people want to learn more about you, if they want to book you, or are you taking on new clients with your consulting? Tell us a little bit about
I
this.
actually am. So I actually have a new program that I am working with clients on and I'm excited about. It is a program that is designed to help you dislodge the toxic myths that are keeping you stuck or stagnant in your professional life. So if you are a established entrepreneur, or if you are an executive who feels like you need to move to a different place, we'll look at those toxic myths that are keeping you where you are. We will dig out your inner charisma, and then we will help you find professional freedom. And you can find out more about me, and we can talk about that program principally through LinkedIn, although you can also find me at purposehighway.com.
Perfect. That's fantastic. And I believe you have a website, Speaker Scott, for people who are interested in your
Absolutely. If
speaking.
you're interested in that, you can look at me there, and you can find me. You can also contact me through that site, and I will respond. I'll talk to someone however you reach me.
Perfect. And I'll have your links on there.
I
But you
appreciate
also have
that.
a podcast too,
I
right?
do. So purposehighway.com is the homepage for my podcast.
Mhm,
The podcast is actually exploring something a little bit different,
mhm.
but it's related to, on a larger social scale, what we're talking about. My thesis, and the thesis of this podcast, is that we are living in a time of profound social change. The historical institutions, including major religions, I will candidly say, that have anchored us and connected us via a sense of purpose, spirituality, and ethical guidance, are in decline, not just in the United States, but around the world. What does that mean? That is a change of historical consequence. So the show is examining why this is happening, but it's also looking at people who are creating new pathways for finding connection to purpose, spirituality, and ethics in the absence of a lot of these historical religious institutions, and helping people connect to a more meaningful life that way.
Mhm.
I was told by a recent guest, this episode hasn't aired yet, but she is a former NASA astrophysicist turned dream interpreter.
I
That,
know her.
oh, you
It's
know her?
Catherine Bell. Yes.
I know, she's phenomenal. She told
Yes.
me my podcast was paradigm shifting. And coming from her, I
That's
took that
awesome.
with pride. I love that you know Catherine Bell. She's incredible.
She is
Wait,
incredible.
maybe that's how I figured out who she was. When I was going on to this, when I knew we'd be working together, I combed through your guest list, listened to that episode, and realized I had to book her. So,
Oh, that's
but I could
great.
not remember how I found out about her. Now I suddenly recall.
I love
Thank you
this.
for making that connection. You didn't even realize you were doing it.
I didn't. I think that's fantastic.
And by the way,
No.
the previous episodes of your show were wonderful to listen to. So anyone who
Oh,
happens to hear this, they need to listen to the rest.
thank you, Scott. That's so nice. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
So this has been so much fun. I have thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you.
I loved it too. Thank you.
Before we go, last question.
Yes,
What are you sure of in life?
I'm sure that the fun I had during the past hour will never happen again, at least in the exact same way that it has. And I'm grateful for that too.
Oh, you're so right. Oh, that's a good one, Scott. Love it. Thank you
You're allowed
so
to
much.
steal it too. You
Yeah.
don't even have to attribute it to me.
Yeah. It's been so great. I
Thank
loved
you.
it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, friends, for joining us. If you enjoyed the show, there are many more episodes and messages just like this that can be found on the Fresh Blood Killing It After 40 podcast, as well as the subsequent YouTube channel or at the joliedowns.com website. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful and fulfilling day.